friends, good morning. Miss Debbie here. We're going to talk a little bit about our pre-writing strokes. All of our children developmentally follow the same sequence in learning how to do pre-writing strokes. Now, I've talked to some of you in IEPs and I've talked about this, but when I send a work home and I say a child is imitating or copying, when I say they're imitating a line, I'll say, do this. I'll draw a line. I actually use a whiteboard at work because I go through so much paper. I have a whiteboard on a 3-inch binder. It's Velcroed onto a 3-inch binder, so it's up a little bit. And then inside I have a pencil bag where it zips and unzips. So the children, they come in, they flip this binder open, they unzip the bag, and they've learned how to do this, and take out the color they want. They get to pick the color, and the eraser is in there also. And they have to tell me the color, and they have to zip it back up and close it back up. And then we start working on how to hold your pencil or pen or marker. I tend to use thicker markers with young kids because they're easier to hold. I don't use this size of a diameter barrel because they're easier for the kids to hold. And we work on them being able to erase the board and copy and imitate. So imitating is when they see the visual right here. I say, do this, and they imitate what I do. Now copying is when, okay, this is new. I show them this and they don't see me draw it at all. Then I say, draw this. Copying is a little bit harder because they don't get that visual of seeing what my hand does. So developmentally, the way the pre-writing strokes go is imitating a vertical line, horizontal line, and circle comes at 2 years of age. Copying comes at 3 years of age. So what we're looking for is, you know, them seeing this and then being able to reproduce it, okay? We want them to be able to close the circle. When I'm working on teaching kids how to close a circle, I'll be saying, I always give them a verbal. I'm like, line down, line across. Your kids know these. I mean, they probably come home and say line down, line across. Around, stop. And then we go to the cross. Line down, line across. And we're looking for the lines to intersect. And you have to be able to intersect lines to write letters. These are all leading up to being able to write letters at age 5. So this comes at 3 years, 11 months. So this is what we want our almost 4-year-olds to be copying at this point in time. Then we do the diagonals. Diagonal, and I have some kids who say it so cute. Di-goggle, di-goggle. And then comes the square, and then the other diagonal, and then the X. And the X is, you have to be able to see those diagonals. Like a lot of times I'll have a kid draw a diagonal, what they'll do is do this because they just don't see that, you know, that diagonal. And then to intersect the 2 diagonal lines. Then this comes at 4 years, 11 months, basically 5 years of age. So kids going into kindergarten, we want them to be copying all these pre-writing strokes to be able to write letters. Now, I have kids that are really, really, really interested in letters, and so they are not doing these, but they are writing letters, and that's okay. But developmentally, we don't want to ask a child to be writing letters if they're just copying a circle, you know, and you'll know by looking at your notes where your child is because every time I work on it, I write it down, and this is just what it means. So let's talk a little bit about holding a pen. A lot of times people will say we want a child to use a mature grasp. A mature grasp is a tripod grasp, and that is not what 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds are doing. Usually it's not really established until age 6, by the time they're in kindergarten, 1st grade. So if you see goals where your child should be using a mature grasp and they're 3 years old, that's not right at all. We use what we call a static tripod. It's where there's no separation between the fingers here. It's all kind of a one unit, and that is perfectly appropriate. You'll see kids using a palmar grasp. You'll see kids using a palmar pronated grasp. This is the one I see the most with incoming 3-year-olds. To see an incoming 3-year-old holding a pen like this, I'm like blown away. I hardly ever see that. Children will use a variety of grasps depending on what they're doing. If they're coloring in a big area, they'll take a crayon and they'll do this because it's a power grasp. They'll do this. They hold it at the top. They do all sorts of things. What we want them to do, and we're working on our leaving 4, turning 5-year-olds that are leaving to go to kindergarten. We're working on them doing this kind of a grasp. Some kids I have who have motor planning issues have such a hard time figuring out how to get there. And once they're there, they look really, really competent and they get good movement. They just can't figure out how to get there. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll say, A-OK pinch, and they'll pinch the marker, and I say, put the fingers in your palm. And this may not look really comfortable because they're not really resting it on this finger. So what I do is I have them hold something. At work I have a bear, a little plastic bear, and I say, hug the bear. I'll have them hug the bear in the last 2 fingers of their hand, and then try to get that fine finger movement. Another thing that I see with children, and it's very normal, is that a lot of times the movement will be coming from the shoulder, or they're stabilizing the elbow and it's coming from the elbow. We want it to be able, eventually, when they're 5 years old, we want them to be able to rest this part of their hand on the table and get fine finger movement. That's what we want for them to be able to write letters. Now, if your child's 3 and they're doing this kind of thing, that's okay. You know, that's stuff that we work on, and you know, it's better for them to be getting out and doing animal walks and riding bikes and crawling around and doing all the things that kids do rather than working on this kind of a thing. Let the classrooms and the schools do that. But anyway, I just wanted to tell you about that. Now, if you want to work on your kids' tracing, and you can download all sorts of things on the internet. If you don't have a printer, then you haven't got any books or anything, one thing you can do is just take a piece of paper, whoops, that's the wrong one, and draw lines with a highlighter. And I usually tell the kids, if they need the visual, green means go and red means stop, you know, that you're not just going zoop, you just keep going. Even that's good, that I'm going in that direction, and you want them to be able to trace the lines. Now this is something that 3-year-olds can work on. So you're doing the horizontal lines, and then you do the vertical lines. Green means go, red means stop. That's a very simple thing that you can work on at home. And if you have an iPad and you can download apps, there's all sorts of apps where they're tracing in lines or tracing in paths and things like that. I just recommend that you use a stylus with your child. If they get used to doing it with their finger, they're not getting any practice of holding a writing tool, and that's what they're going to have to be doing. So whenever I am having them trace their names or trace on paths on the iPad, I'm using a stylus with them. And you can pick up a stylus for pretty cheap. Walmart, Staples, Target, anywhere. You can get them on Amazon. You can get all sorts of fun things. So that's something that 3-year-olds can do. Now, when I work on the kids tracing their names on an iPad, that's a little more forgiving. I mean, you can be kind of off the path. It's a lot more interesting for them because it's a screen and they're more interested in looking at screens. But after I do that, I always have them trace their name on a piece of paper. And I do the starting, and I work on correct letter formation. Like I might say, green means go, start at dot, line down, hop to the top, big curve. For the E, E's are pretty hard. We hit the ball, go around the bases, 1, 2, 3, and stop. And I'll usually let a child do this and see what they can do. If they are even staying, some kids are just scribbling, they're not ready to be doing that, or they're even trying to stay within the letter while they're doing it. Some kids have a really hard time staying on the path. So this would be line down, climb up the line, and a bump. They're not going to be doing anything like this. I mean, some of the 5-year-olds are writing their own names now, so that's a great thing. But if you want to practice a name on a piece of paper, you can do that. Another thing, if you want to practice the alphabet and you don't have any books or you don't have any paper, you can just write the alphabet out. And make sure, most of our kids are doing the uppercase alphabet. I always teach them to do their name in upper and lowercase because a lot of times in preschool we teach them all uppercase. But when they get to kindergarten, they're going to have to learn how to do it upper and lower. So sometimes I just do it that way so they get used to it. But generally, uppercase letters are easier for kids to reproduce, so that's where we start in preschool. If you have any questions about your specific child, please feel free to email me. I'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.